Hello, and welcome to live programming here at the More Freedom Foundation. Are we actually live? I think there's like a minute delay. And welcome. That is fantastic. Hello and welcome. Please let me know in the chat if this is coming through all right. I have set up this new studio OBS streaming software that should eventually allow me to interview people on the channel again, which would be very cool. And once I've figured that out, hopefully I'll be able to interview people again and make the whole live streaming stuff here on the channel better in a number of ways. Apologies for the delay here. Luckily, I think we've only got 3 or 4 folks watching so far, so it won't be too many folks who were inconvenienced there. Welcome to the 19th patrons-only newscast. For those of you who are new, a number of new patrons this month, welcome aboard. This is very different from the public live cast that you might have seen. Basically, I have a list of sort of 13 topics, including topics that have been suggested by other folks. And I'm going to go through those topics item by item, one by one. And as we go, I will deal with any comments that come up in the live chat. So this is very give and take. We rarely have more than 5 to 10 people who tune in for this live. Usually about 60, 70, so 60, more or less 60, 70% of the patrons end up watching this eventually. But every question gets dealt with, every issue that folks might have as we go along will continue to be dealt with. Just want to double check. Can someone in the chat just say this is coming through live? Because I'm not 100% sure that that is what is happening. It's sort of weird from my viewpoint. We've got 2 separate. There's a lot of different windows going on here. It's not the way that I've become used to looking at this. I can switch scenes, which I haven't set up in any useful way, but this is a very cool technology that I hope will be used much better in future. And I am grateful to the patrons for allowing me to try it out on all of you. I think the one main point that on Patreon, someone had asked what the status of the U.S. Empire Project is. It's very much something that I'm working on. I'll discuss that at length, as well as some thoughts on the future of the channel at the end of this presentation. But for now, let's just get into it. Let's start. Okay, everything looks good to me. That's great. Okay. Great. People are here. That is phenomenal. Let's get right into it. Let's talk about. I think I wanted to set up a contrast here. Over the past month, we've seen the United States pressuring China and Russia very hard. So we've got the Taiwan, what I like to call the Taiwan nothing burger, and the Ukraine something burger. As I've emphasized in videos this month, it is very much the United States that has created the uncomfortable situations here. And with Taiwan, it's just, I've been kind of in a tailspin over this since I think it was only the beginning of November, right? Or was it the beginning of October when we got that news that there were U.S. soldiers on Taiwan. In recent, there's been no concrete news as to how long those U.S. soldiers have been on Taiwan. I saw one article that talked about maybe they had been there since even before Trump. And that puts really everything about U.S.-China relations in a very new perspective, and makes it look obvious to me that we've been sort of not tap dancing on, but just pounding up and down, blowing up, taking a shit on their red lines over Taiwan for like a decade now, which makes a lot about Chinese politics and policy more generally fairly understandable. More understandable, and does not make the U.S. look like the good guy here, as far as I'm concerned. I know I have many who would disagree with me on that. But what's so stunning about the whole revelation there, and what we've seen since, is it just seems between the revelation that we have the troops on Taiwan, Biden's just near constant gaffes on Taiwan, a real lack of clarity. Yes, strategic ambiguity is part of how we deal with Taiwan, but there is a real there's an etiquette around discussing Taiwan relations that seems ridiculous, but that is a key part of why the U.S. and China have been able to work together for the past 50 years. And Biden, haha, Biden's kind of, decayed. He's a little senile, but he's just constantly talking about Taiwan as if it's a U.S. ally that is going to be defended. And while that, to some degree, ally is a very problematic term, but while that is to some degree probably true, it's not something that the U.S. is supposed to say. Responsible Statecraft, the Quincy Institute outfit, the sort of the only good think tank in Washington D.C. as far as I'm concerned, put out an article this week talking about how this sort of discarding of old etiquette around strategic ambiguity is also extending to other people in the Biden administration. So it's not just Biden being sort of mentally decayed, it's actual U.S. policy to be redefining strategic ambiguity unilaterally in ways that allow us to sell more weapons to Taiwan and apparently just have troops there and make them really transparent, practically, a NATO ally or beyond, which is obviously sort of catastrophic destruction of China's understanding of the U.S. China-Taiwan sort of tri-relationship or what have you. But I gotta say, and maybe I'll be proved wrong here, but I see the chances of China invading Taiwan to be essentially nil. I just don't see it. I don't think it's honestly a possibility for a number of reasons. The number of options, the possibilities that have been, opportunities that have been missed to do that have been kind of extreme. You've got the beginning of January, I guess from January 6th to January 21st, the United States didn't really have a president and was so focused on its own issues. I mean, if you'd gotten through the clusterfuck of the last 3 months of the Trump presidency without Chinese invasion of Taiwan, especially now that we know that the U.S. had already installed troops on Taiwan, blowing through China's red lines. Well, it's just not something that was going to happen. The fact that we've had U.S. troops on Taiwan for years and years and years, and China hasn't really done anything about it other than dump some concrete in the South China Sea and crush Hong Kong. I find it now almost laughable, the idea that that China would invade Taiwan. Unfortunately, as sort of a somewhat pacifistic type man, my takes this week are disturbingly pro U.S. military-industrial complex. To be clear, I still very firmly advocate cutting the budget for the U.S. Pentagon and intelligence community in half. But unfortunately, despite the fact that I see China's invasion of Taiwan as essentially an impossibility, part of the reason why it's an impossibility is because of U.S. arms sales to Taiwan. In a video that I put out beginning of this year on YouTube and recently sort of reposted on TikTok and Chunks, obviously we're selling many of the wrong weapons to Taiwan and to China. I think that Taiwan and to Japan. I think that aircraft carriers are nonsense. But I think it is important to acknowledge that one of the reasons why China's invasion of Taiwan is just such a laughable, unthinkable idea to me now is because of certainly not the fucking tanks or the destroyers or the jet fighters we sell to Taiwan, but because of the missiles we sell to Taiwan and the missiles that Taiwan should be building itself. I just don't see a Chinese invasion of Taiwan as any sort of real possibility. And it's going to take a lot It would actually take an invasion of Taiwan by China to change my understanding of that. Will China, if things really, really fall apart in the coming years, like will China try to take some of the islands, the Taiwanese islands that are closer to China? Yeah, I think that's a possibility. But yeah, like the whole idea of like a full-fledged Chinese invasion of Taiwan just doesn't strike me as practicable. One reason, and this sort of transitions over to the Ukraine, question burger. Is Ukraine a something burger? Russia thing is the complete impracticability or complete unknown that is naval warfare between large powers. It has been 80 years since we've had an open, well, I guess pretty much since the Battle of Midway, I guess. That would have been, I suppose that would have been 1942. So we're only at 79 years since there has been a meaningful, real conflict between enemy navies. I think after the Battle of Midway, there were certainly large conflicts in the Pacific between the U.S. and Japanese navies, but I think there was sort of a foregone conclusion by then. So it has been 79 years, extraordinary advances in digital, global positioning technologies. So it's honestly hard for me to comprehend how China, a generally, fairly unchallenged or untrained military, would be willing to risk a naval battle. That I think, to be clear, I think that the U.S. doesn't have very many assets that are useful in a naval battle, but we've got missiles, and we've got Japan, and we've got bases we can launch missiles from. And I think that in the context where every U.S. and Chinese surface ship in the scenario where every U.S. and Chinese surface ship were sunk, which I think is a very likely scenario in war between China and the United States, within the first 45 minutes, the U.S., Taiwan, Japan still wins, quite straightforwardly. You can't, if you can't get troops from China to Taiwan, then it is a loss for China. So yeah, I just don't. I do think that likely first half hour or first 3 days scenario for a U.S.-China war is every surface ship in the one dash line or the three, I can't remember how the every surface ship within 400 miles of the Chinese coastline would be sunk, and in that context, Taiwan wins. China is extraordinarily humiliated. So I just don't see the Taiwan stuff as serious, and I'm actually contemplating. I'm going to keep making Taiwan videos because much more on TikTok than on YouTube, but people seem to want to watch them. But I think I'm pretty much getting pretty close to putting Taiwan, China's invasion of Taiwan, in the same box as North Korea. It's like one of those or like the debt. I think I talked about sort of the North Korea box, the will the Republicans make the U.S. default on its debt? I mean, these things that would be catastrophic if they happened. A Chinese invasion of Taiwan, the North Koreans launching a nuclear war, the Republicans causing a U.S. debt default. These are catastrophic, apocalyptic scenarios that I just don't think are ever going to happen. Like, if they happen, they would be disastrous. They're worth knowing about in that way, but they're probably not worth looking into because there's like a 99.995% chance they're just not going to happen. So yeah, I'm getting to that place with. Now, I'm not to say that the unlike I think North Korea and the debt default prospect for the U.S. government, like I could see this shifting absolutely. If the Chinese Communist Party gets even less secure, if the Chinese economy collapses, if the Chinese economy, figures its shit out and starts growing at 5 to 6 to 10% again, I mean, then yeah, we would revisit this in 10 years. But honestly, I just don't see the U.S. getting into Taiwan this decade. Okay, we've got Ryan Guard says, I like the art on the wall. Thank you. This is from my I think my grandparents bought these paintings in Italy in the 50s or something like that. They probably cost about $10 then, and are probably worth about $10 now. But yeah, they are nice looking, aren't they? Thank you. Siren says everything looks good to me. Thanks. I'm glad that's working. Local Cool Extreme says, to all patrons, please join the MFF Discord server to interact with Rob and the community and get regular updates on videos and live streams. Yes, please do that. Discord is something that I did not understand and was not interested in, but Loga and other folks have convinced me to get into it, and now I really enjoy it, actually. It's sort of at the end of the day, I go through... it's sort of like a WhatsApp group. I've got all my college buddies are on a WhatsApp group, and we talk about sports and poop jokes mostly. And now I have a sort of geopolitics, a chat with my geopolitics buddies, and it's great actually because people can keep me aware of things they'd like me to be aware of. I think I know a lot more about what's going on in Latin America and Libya specifically than I would have otherwise without this chat. It's an opportunity for patrons to sort of make it more likely that these things get discussed. It's also it's a good place to shoot the shit. We talk a lot about the things that are impacting each person's country. Now it seems like monthly, much less formally, we basically just do a Zoom chat through Discord, which is kind of cool. I don't prepare anything for it. Folks just talk about what's going on in their countries, and we talk about geopolitical issues, what movies we like to watch, whatever. And that's a lot of fun. So I like Discord, and folks should sign up for that. Let's see. Richard Irma says hello. Hello there. Richard, feel free to patron Discord. I see you switching scenes. Yes, I've switched scenes, which is something else I'm learning about. I'm learning all these new things. It's very exciting. Local Cruel Extreme says, easy for you to say. China's dumping concrete in our backyard here in ASEAN. Yeah, that's true. I think I don't know if that's said in jest, Logo, but I think that's a really key thing that keeps cropping up on more with Russia and Ukraine. It's just sort of like, well, if you were, you wouldn't be so blasé about this if you were living in Ukraine. Well, it's like, yeah, but I don't live in Ukraine, and the United States isn't really personally responsible for things that happen in Ukraine or Taiwan or Malaysia or this, that, and the other thing. And that might seem kind of callous, but I think it's important with both Russia and China issues to recall that we are dealing with the chance of nuclear war. We are dealing with the possible wiping out of all human life in a fiery apocalypse. So you'll forgive me if my commitment to Ukrainian democracy, such as it is not as so ironclad that I'm more interested in that than the existence of all human beings. Which is not to say that I have no respect or interest in Ukrainian sovereignty or Taiwanese autonomy. That's not true. I am interested in these things, but I think it's important to keep in mind that we are also there are other powers in the world that have interests, and it actually serves everybody, all 7 billion of us, continued existence, but also prosperity and peace and development to have a little consideration for the ways that China and Russia see the world, which I see very little of. I'm not sure, but yeah, I mean, I guess that is true, that ASEAN has real concerns over what China does, and I am very interested in the U.S. to some degree supporting those concerns. Local Extreme says, I think that an invasion of Taiwan is still impossible in 2027 if Trump wins in 2024. China could easily bribe him to hold off military action and discourage Japan from invasion. Is still possible in 2027. The thing about Trump and his bribeability is that I think that he can't be bribed to, well, maybe he can, but he can't be bribed to stand up and make speeches and say, I love immigrants. Let's, the border is secure. Let's let in a whole bunch of people. Like, that's not something, because being anti-immigration is so key to Donald Trump's appeal that I don't think he can really back off on that the way he can sell off every other interest of the United States. Another thing that I don't really think he can do is I think because being anti-China is so key to Trump's appeal, I also don't, despite the fact that you can make a very strong argument that his day-to-day handling of China was actually pretty dumb and not effective from an anti-China perspective, I don't think Trump could be like, you know what, let China have Taiwan. Like, I feel like that goes too far against Trump's political persona for that to be a possibility. So yeah, I don't think that's I would disagree with that. Or maybe I misunderstood your comment, Logan. Comment from Cow of Evelyn Discord. I feel like any conflict with China will eventually go nuclear, especially because we haven't had a naval battles in so long. I think that's a very real concern. Yeah, I did it on I did a thing on TikTok that I will eventually, I'll put at the end of the month. I'll upload to YouTube on a compilation. Don't want to force anybody to go on to TikTok, which is basically pointing out, like, we know how the world's going to end. Like, it's not going to be, it's not going to be like rogue AI or climate change or asteroids. Like, it's very clear to me that, like, the world is going to end in nuclear fire. It's up to us whether that's in 5 days or 5 centuries. Like, and the way the U.S. foreign policy community works in the United States right now, it looks likely to me to be like almost certain within the next 5 to 50 years, because we are so unhinged from the idea that anybody else in the world might have any interests that we might be obligated to respect. So yeah, like I think there is a real concern that things will go nuclear. I read Admiral James Stavridis wrote this book called 2034, which I thought was largely crap, but it is a much better book on the same topic called Ghost Fleet that came out about 7 years ago, which is the topic of war between U.S. and China. And what was fascinating about this book was I hated every page of it, but then, like, looking at it as a whole, like, he had basically written a book where the U.S. starts and loses World War III. So I thought, like, that fundamental insight, like, actually made the book, as shitty as it was, like, somewhat worthwhile. But the more that I think about it, and the more Admiral James Stavridis columns I read, it's like, did he not even recognize that he'd written a book where the U.S. starts and loses a nuclear war? Like, did he not even get that? Like, the book opens, the war starts because the U.S. is doing these very aggressive freedom of navigation things, and then stops a Chinese vessel with no right to do so. So I was like, oh my God, yeah, this is obviously the U.S. fucking up and starting World War III. And I'm kind of wondering, like, does like most of the people who read that 2034 book, do they even realize that the book is about an aggressive United States starting and losing a nuclear war for absolutely no fucking reason? I'm not sure, actually, in retrospect, that they realize that. But anyway, but yeah, no, I think that's a real concern. There's a real possibility of nuclear conflict between China and the United States, or Russia and the United States. There's one common denominator here. It's the United States backing countries into the corner. This is another thing I've said many times, but it's like when I was a kid, we were fighting over Vietnam and Germany. Now we are fighting over places where significant chunks of the population speak Russian or Chinese. Like, and again, I don't want to sacrifice the sovereignty or autonomy of Ukraine and Taiwan, respectively, but I do think we should be a little more aware that China and Russia have interests, legitimate or not, and they are nuclear powers. I think that's something we need to be more aware of. Local Cool Extreme says the 45 minutes of total fleet destruction will freak China out, or the U.S. Navy seeing an aircraft carrier sink will trigger a nuclear exchange. Yeah, I think those are real possibilities. It's just a really bad idea. I think it's crazy. I'm reading a lot, U.S. Empire Project. I'm reading a lot about the Cold War, reading a great, little too lefty book right now just about the last 50 years or whatnot. And it's fascinating reading about the 80s and how there was this massive worldwide anti-nuclear weapon movement. We do see after effects of it that have negative reactions, like shutting down all the nuclear reactors in Germany, which is unfortunate. There used to be apparently in the 80s, 1 million people got together in the Central Park in the United States, a place that is, really allergic to mass public action. 1 million people had a rally in Central Park in New York City, and mirrored worldwide against nuclear weapons. We need that again. Because I think during the Cold War, there was a real consciousness of how horrific these weapons were. You had a lot, for all of the Cold War, at least the people in charge, were people who had seen war. I mean, George H.W. Bush was very young, but he fought in World War II. This is the U.S. president that oversaw the end of the Cold War. These were people who knew how stupid war was, how potentially destructive it was, and how horrific nuclear weapons could be because, they saw these weapons being used in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. That consciousness just strikes me as gone. It's just not there anymore. There's no public pressure anymore. You can actually see the 2034 book that Stavridis wrote as almost kind of like a, hey, what would the reaction be? Let's see what it would look like in this novel that has the war go nuclear. Because he has a nuclear war that people decide to back off on and survive. So man, the more I think about that book, I wish I had given it the 0-star review on Goodreads that it deserved. But anyway, comment from Richard Irma says, I hate that when something happens in Ukraine, then a host of reporters flood to Eastern Estonia and Latvia and start creating stories like, what if the Baltics are next? I agree. I couldn't hate that more. I think I made 2 videos, 5-6 years ago now, talking about how secure the Baltics were. Maybe I should repost those. Actually, I need to do a community post today. Trying to do a short and a community post almost every day. Yay. We'll talk more about why I'm doing that at the end of this video. Start creating stories like, what if the Baltics are next? Yeah, it's tremendously frustrating. One of the really just central things, Russians living in the Baltic countries, they are significant populations. I don't think anywhere near as significant as in Ukraine, but I could be wrong about that. In some countries, they do face negative, civil rights issues, but the Russians living in the Baltic countries are dramatically better off than the Russians living in Russia. And the key thing that makes Ukraine different is that the Russians living in Ukraine and are not better off than the Russians living in Russia. And that may be shifting a little in recent years, but I haven't seen anything conclusive that says that it's really shifting. It's amazing with all this outcry over how much the West has to support Ukraine over the past 7 years. There's been a lot of hemming and hawing about whether we're going to give them lethal weapons, which I think we decided to do, which I think was a mistake. But not a lot about pumping a fraction of the billions of dollars that go into Poland or Hungary to actually make life better within Ukraine. I don't know. Richard says, Russians here are not exactly patriots, but they can see what an asshole Russia is when they visit their relatives across the border. Yes, this is Richard Irma speaking from the Baltics, I'm assuming. Okay, Malagu assumes, yes, I misspelled it. It was supposed to be possible. That I think I responded to that, the possibility of Trump being bribed for Taiwan. Richard, moreover, some years ago, a town across the border tried to hold a referendum to join Estonia in order to bargain for more funding from Moscow. That's amazing. So what Richard Irma is describing a situation where far from Russians in Estonia wanting to be a fifth column for Russia, actual Russians on the other side of the border, Russians in Russia trying to secede, threatening to secede from Russia to join Estonia. Slightly different sets of situations here. The EU is a really, really useful tool for creating happier countries. Also, let's keep in mind that the Baltic countries, I think all three together, the Baltic countries, are like a fifth of Ukraine's population now, right? Correct me if I'm wrong about that. It's certainly a different scale of problem in the Baltics. But I believe that the Baltics are extraordinarily securely within the Western camp now. Which is, and also worth emphasizing, the Baltics, until I was 10 years old in 1989, I just read this. I can't remember, it was somewhere between 1989 and 92. It was tremendously controversial, where the Baltics became independent, but they had been part of the Soviet Union, and with the exception of a 20-year gap in the 20th century, had been part of the Russian Empire before that, back to the 1700s. So I think it is worth considering just how much Russia has lost when we tell them, no, it's to just relax about Ukraine joining NATO. Brando Commando says hello. Hello, Brando Commando. Welcome. Sisi has completely modernized the Navy, the Air Force. Egyptian soldiers are now well trained and equipped, and most important, the economy is improving. That's Egypt. Not sure, Fadel. Is that Fadel wants to talk about Egypt? Yeah, that is something that Fadel had actually asked me to look into a little more that I have not, which is just the amount of money that Sisi is spending on the military. What's interesting, of course, is that U.S. funding for Egypt, which is, I believe, as established, I think, as a result of the Camp David Accords back in the 70s. We give Egypt an extraordinary amount of money every year that is meant to be spent on their military. And because the military is so powerful in Egypt, that's something that they tend to do. I looked into it a little bit, Fadel, but not enough to be able to talk. I mean, that's sort of what I bare bones understand about Egypt and the Egyptian military. They get I think it's $2 billion from the U.S. every year. I hadn't read enough that convinced me about, or that illustrated enough to me about the differences or the step change that you've been talking about. I'm confident it's there. I'm not quite wrapping my head around that aspect of Egyptian politics at this point. I find Egyptian politics so depressing, and find Sisi personally so loathsome. It's just he's a dictator who came to power murdering 1,000 people like that, like publicly, like gunning down protesters in a public square. I think the one-day body count from that one square might only be like 800 people, but over the course of that week, you can rest assured that he killed another 200 people, including Egypt's first democratically elected president, whether or not he was worthwhile, died in jail, which is pretty fucked up. But I haven't done any in-depth study on Egypt recently, Fadel, so I can't really speak to that. I apologize. Local streams of Brando Commando. Hello, feel free to join the Patreon. Okay, Loga, let's thank you. You've mentioned the Discord, and I think everyone should join it. But let's hold off on the pitching until the end, if you wouldn't mind, Loga. That would be good. An authoritarian Egypt running MENA does not sound nice. I agree. That is not a good thing. Nor do I think it is particularly likely. Yeah, I don't see Egypt, no matter how much you arm up a place, what matters is the actual experience of your military. And I feel like even Libya, I feel like an Egypt that marched into Libya, even Libya with its chaos, would present a challenge for the Egyptian military. I do think it's more of a possibility now that we would see some kind of bombing runs against the Ethiopian government, but an Egyptian expeditionary force to Ethiopia, that would require a much higher degree of cooperation with Sudan than I believe is possible. I don't know. I think I'm getting a clear message that I should pay a little more attention to Egypt and be a little. I mean, maybe my lack of concern about Egyptian military hegemony is just a generalized lack of respect for Egypt, a place with extraordinary potential from the 1880s, from before the British invasion to after, even during the British invasion, British occupation. Egypt was tremendously important and looked like a growing Arab power, and certainly under Nasser. And that is not the way that I have thought about Egypt over the past 30, 40 years. So maybe it's time for a rethink, but I don't have any current data on that. Brandon Commando says, if I was on my computer, I would. On my phone at work right now, Local Cool Extreme. Local Cool Extreme says, Fado, but what's going to come after him? I guess we're talking about Egypt, CC here. Brandon Commando, after the stream, we'll post a link to the Discord in the comments section. Feel free to join when you have a computer. Yes, I mean, it's true. I mean, CC, replaced a democratically elected government that was sort of a colossal failure, but, places learn, people learn. Even if it were a Muslim Brotherhood government again that was elected to power in Egypt, it would have the experience of Morsi's cataclysmic failure. It would be a wiser, probably more concerned with constitutionality government than the one that Morsi provided that collapsed so ignominiously. And ended with Morsi in prison. It collapsed under its own weight to a degree, but it was also crushed by a vicious dictator. However, it would be dishonest to not recognize that there were large portions of the Egyptian populace that wanted this merciless dictator to come to power. So, Egypt. Ryan Gard says, crazy idea for easing tensions in Ukraine. Invite Russia to join NATO. That was a real possibility, Ryan. One of the escalation things over the past year, there's a really fucking stupid diplomatic tit for tat between Russia and the United States. We kick out some of their diplomats, they kick out some of our diplomats. It's honestly infantile and idiotic. For two nuclear powers to be treating each other this way. It's just one of those things that, increase the chance of the end of human civilization by 1% or something. It's really disappointing, but one of the signs of that was Russia had a liaison office with NATO. I think has had that since... I don't know if it goes back to before the fall of the Soviet Union, but certainly it's been there for a while. Diplomatic engagement, what can we work on together, yada, yada. And I think that is part of this tit-for-tat diplomatic nonsense we've been experiencing over the past year or so. I believe that office is now closed. I'm more interested in Russia joining the EU, but I acknowledge that is decades off. Logan Cool Extreme, for some reason that reminds me of Superman 4, when Superman just took everyone's weapons and threw them into the sun. God, that was such a bad... Well, I have not thought about Superman 4 for quite some time. Thank you, Logan Cool Extreme. I'm not sure I've seen Superman 4 since the 1980s. Yeah, I do recall it not being a very good film. Logan Cool Extreme says, the day China becomes a serious threat is when that will happen. Yeah, I think that's true. The day that China becomes a serious threat is the day the day that China becomes a serious threat is the day that Russia joins NATO and actually gets concerned. As I've pointed out numerous times on the channel, Russia has a lot more to fear from a continuing to rise China than it does from Europe. It is kind of interesting, though, in the context, if we really are something that I think has gone from a suspicion to what now seems to be happening, is like a China where the era of super growth is over, a China that won't admit but has to acknowledge they have no chance of taking back Taiwan. If we get to that point, I think I now do see a real possibility, because I see China revealed to be so much weaker than I thought it was. I do see a real possibility of a Russian-Chinese, again, Russia would be a satellite of China rather than an ally, but the chances of them being forced together for a longer period of time get higher the weaker China is, which I think is just an extension of what Logo was saying there. But it is kind of interesting. Ryan Gard says, how are things for you on TikTok? I'm not on the platform, but I like your cross posts on YouTube. And I'm going to continue to do that. At the end of every month, most of what I do on TikTok, I'm uploading there now twice a day, because these shorts that I'm doing on YouTube every day just fit over there. And every week I spend 45 minutes cutting together old YouTube videos. So I've got a clip and a short over there every day. And it's going really well. Since I started, I think I've been uploading on TikTok every day for 3 or 4 months. I started uploading twice a day, and wow, it's been quite successful. But yeah, any original content that I do on TikTok, I will cut together for a monthly dump on YouTube. I'm committed to not making people sign up for TikTok. But yeah, so far things are going great. However, I'm not super optimistic about it yet, because TikTok is pretty legendary for just cutting out on their creators. I've already gotten a few community guidelines warnings. Apparently, you get enough of those, and they just yank your whole account, and you never see it again. So yeah, I'm not super excited. It's very exciting to add almost 1,000 subscribers. As I think I'm now at a point on YouTube where it takes me, I don't know if I've added 1,000 subscribers in the past 2 years. Over the past 2 weeks on TikTok, I've added 1,000 subscribers, which is very exciting. But that's from a very low base. So I don't know. If it continues to develop like this over the next month or so, then who knows? We'll be talking more seriously about TikTok, and I'll probably start focusing on TikTok more rather than using it as sort of a dumping ground for my clips. But regardless, YouTube, despite the fact that YouTube has no interest in showing my content to anybody new anymore, I believe that I think that's the approach to free speech that YouTube is taking. I think they're happy to even make money off of my content. It's a couple $100. I think it's roughly 50-50 on YouTube. So, I make a couple $100, and YouTube makes a couple $100 off of YouTube advertising. So they're not going to show me to anybody else. They're not going to let me grow my platform, but I think they're content to let me keep yammering away, so that they don't look like they're compulsively anti-free speech. So I think what I'm trying to say is I think my continued use of YouTube as a platform is safe. It's no longer useful to me for growth. The TikTok platform is absolutely dynamic and dynamite for growth. Over the past, 1,000 subscribers in a month. That's amazing. I haven't done that since 2017 or 2018 on YouTube. But I have zero faith in my security on that platform. It's interesting. I start getting community guidelines when my problems on TikTok when my videos get over a certain level of popularity. So it's almost like I can dissent against U.S. foreign policy on TikTok only to a certain point. And then I risk losing the channel entirely, which is interesting. I'll talk more about that at the end. Ukraine, about 45 million with about 10 million Russians, and Baltics with 6 million with about 1 million Russians. Thank you. That's very interesting. And wow, so that's more than the population of Ukraine is more than 6-7 times larger than all of the population of the Baltics combined, and with a much higher proportion of Russians than the Baltics. Richard Irma says Ukraine with the living standard of Egypt or Namibia, Lithuania, Estonia with the living standard of Puerto Rico or Spain. Yeah. Latvia, although geographically in the middle, is economically a bit behind. That's interesting. Would not have thought of that. I've been to Latvia and Lithuania. I've not been to Estonia. Local Extreme Run Guard quite well. He's gained over 100 new followers in the past 24 hours, and 6 videos have almost hit 10,000 views. Yes, TikTok is going well. Says, I apologize for being so heavy-handed. No need to apologize, Loga. Appreciate the work that you do. Brando Commander, any idea why the UK media and government is having a meltdown over the situation in Ukraine as well as Bosnia? Honestly, the situation in Bosnia, I am more sympathetic towards having a meltdown over. The one, and I would concede that in 1995, the U.S. and NATO intervention in Bosnia was a good intervention or what have you. Like, I think it saved lives. I think it stopped conflict. The problem, of course, is that another aspect of, foreign intervention is that you can have a situation that becomes reliant on sort of permanent foreign involvement and occupation. I think the actual NATO forces on the ground enforcing the Bosnia ceasefire, haven't looked into it for a while, but I mean, it's like a couple hundred. It's not that much. But from like an institutional standpoint, like it's still very reliant. The stability of Bosnia, it's still technically Bosnia and Herzegovina. The stability of that with its weird divisions, I think there's even a small Croatian republic as well, but I think in the main, the Bosniak Republic and the Republika Srpska, it's just this incredibly unwieldy way to run a country that under the Dayton Accords that were sort of Dayton, Ohio Accords set up during the Clinton administration in the aftermath, or rather I think it's sort of part of our bombing campaign in '95. It's really unwieldy. It's really a mess. I think interesting that the UK would be going nuts about that. I don't really understand why that would be. But in Europe, I think there are many reasons why Bosnia is blowing up at the moment. Not in terms of violence. What's happening, is my understanding, limited understanding, is that in the Republika Srpska, one of these two, I think there's a Croatian Republic as well, so I guess 3 divisions, but it's much smaller. The main things are the Bosnian Muslim versus the Serbs within Bosnia. I think that the current leader of Republika Srpska is actively blowing up the government of Bosnia and Herzegovina, that these groups can work together, and that's really problematic for Europe because it is so invested in the peace process there, and it being seen as a success of some sort. The reason, I would say the main reason why this is falling apart without some kind of solution is because I would argue I understand Turkish anger at not being allowed into the European Union, but I do understand to a degree that the EU simply, went too far with expansion in '04. and just simply isn't prepared to let Turkey in this decade or probably the next decade. And I think that's really fucked up. I think the Turks are right to be angry about promises made and not kept. But I understand that. I understand why the EU saw itself as unable to digest Turkey as promised. However, the EU choice not to accelerate the accession of Bosnia, Serbia, Macedonia, Northern Macedonia now is what we call it, strikes me as incredibly irresponsible because that's, I think, the reason that these places have stayed peaceful with these unwieldy Dayton Accords contraptions is the understanding that, okay, if we can just stop killing each other, we'll all be part of the EU. And Croatia, Croatia and Slovenia, which were very much parties to the Yugoslav war. I mean, Slovenia was always much richer and was able to get itself out of Yugoslavia much more easily than the other countries. But Croatia now, much more heavy participant in the Yugoslav wars of the 90s, is a member of the EU and has been for, at least a decade now. I can't remember if it came in 04 or not. So yeah, I understand some of the concerns that EU members have about the poorly run, weird-ass, vaguely kleptocratic, hyper-nationalist, weird-ass Balkan countries that are not yet in the European Union. But at the end of the day, these are tiny fucking places. And I think that they would be, even if everybody in these places just decided to leave and go get better jobs in Italy and Poland, the consequences of people leaving these countries would be so slim and so small for the rest. And the benefit in avoiding a flaring up of one of the worst wars in recent decades in Europe is high. So yeah, anyway, I think Bosnia is about is the EU not just holding its nose and letting Serbia, Bosnia, Kosovo, and Northern Macedonia join the EU and just sort of really just money bombing the place until it looked sane. I think that's something that could work. Sorry, I just had that I wanted to say about Bosnia. I'm not sure if I really answered your question. Why is UK media and government having a meltdown over the situation? Well, I mean, Britain has a military-industrial complex too, and they like. And as actually, Jesus, we have made it. We've talked for an hour and have made it through one of the items I wanted to discuss. So let's talk about Ukraine now. How about we do that? So I talked about Taiwan as a nothing burger and Ukraine as a something burger because Ukraine seems more plausible to me. I think there's a lot that can be said about U.S. media propping this up, making it seem like more of a thing that it is. But I do think there's a possibility, and I think the Russians are interested in presenting this, but I think it also is true that there is a real possibility of the U.S., the Ukraine, fucking things up, and Russia fucking things up diplomatically enough that Putin or someone after Putin makes the decision that say, "Fuck it, we're just invading Ukraine. We're just gonna destroy Ukraine's military and occupy the Donbass region," which I think is probably a more realistic possibility than Russia taking all of Ukraine. I just don't see that as a possibility. But yeah, I think in Taiwan, what with just the vagaries of what would naval warfare look like after 80 years, that conflict just seems the unknowns are so massive that it seems much less likely. But with we know what ground war looks like to an extent in Ukraine because there's been one going on for the past 7 years since the U.S. organized a coup and Russia decided to invade in 2014. So we know what war looks like. Russia had a vaguely humiliating experience that also, I think, met its geostrategic goals in Georgia back in 2008 when it invaded. The Ukrainian military is absolutely a harder nut to crack than the Georgian military. But yeah, like this is a much more known quantity. It is something that I could, whether or not, leaving aside the question of whether Russia is going to invade Ukraine. I think if the Washington Post is writing articles saying that Russia might invade in January or February, I think you can say with great confidence that Russia won't be invading in January or February. Maybe they'd invade in December. You know, maybe they're invading right now, and I just haven't looked at the thing. I do think that it's probably just more jockeying, more a sense that Biden is weak, which is probably true. I don't know. I think Biden is. I don't know if Biden is weak, but he is definitely decayed. And Russia just sort of jockeying for advantage. What's also important to keep in mind, like Taiwan is actually a sane democracy. And the party in power in Taiwan is dedicated to sort of pushing the envelope on Taiwanese autonomy in ways that bug me, honestly, that I think upset the apple cart in ways that aren't necessary. But it is a sane democracy that functions in given ways. If this approach of the Taiwanese party is judged to be successful, it will be rewarded. I think it's already been reelected. If it is judged by the Taiwanese people to not be serving their interests and they want to get closer to China again, well, they'll vote in the KMT. Ukrainian democracy. There was a funny tweet a day or two ago that was widely mocked, saying that the Russians aren't afraid of NATO, they're afraid of Ukrainian democracy. And I think the reaction of most who actually know anything about Ukraine was like, well, shit. Well, they're not really afraid of much, because honestly, Ukrainian democracy has not proven itself to be a benign or positive alternative to Russian democracy, such as it is. I mean, they still have elections in Russia. And they have elections in Ukraine that really, really often it was a democratically free and fair, but no, a democratically elected pro-Russian president that the U.S. carried out a coup against in 2014. Zelensky, the current, is it a president or a prime minister? Anyway, the current leader of Ukraine was elected on a pro-Russia platform. And Ukraine often elects governments that are pro-Russia and end up being anti-Russia. And I also don't want to, I'm coming across as a little too pro-Russia here. Like Russia also, Ukraine is double fucked. They get U.S. coups, they get Russian corruption, it's a nightmare. There's a very open question. I think I was reading very open question the degree to which Zelensky is even in control of his own military and government. Real possibility of Zelensky getting cooed out. I think there's one of the reasons that Zelensky, a guy who ran on a pro-Russia platform, is now turning it into such a war hawk. Let's not forget that he also got dragged into impeachment proceedings in the United States, another complication. But one of the reasons he's become such a war hawk is because he was in serious danger of getting cooed out by oligarchs or elements of the Ukrainian military that wanted war. Ukraine is a mess. It is like a tripartite clusterfuck. It is a place where there is an ongoing war that Russia has plausible plans to insert itself into. I'm not saying like has plans to do it for sure, but has the general staff of its military knows how its military could have an effect. I think Ukraine, this war that the U.S. started by organizing a coup in Ukraine in 2014, and the Russia escalated in unforgivable ways by invading. I think I'm perfectly happy to call what Russia did in Ukraine an invasion. You don't just get to annex parts of other countries with a referendum. You know, Russia and the United States together have really, really fucked up Ukraine and made it a tremendous danger to everyone on the planet and Europe as well. So yeah, like I think that while absolutely the Russian government, the U.S. government, and the Ukrainian government are all invested in making the Ukraine issue look like a bigger deal than it should be for defense industry aspects, Brando Commando, I think there are legitimate concerns in Ukraine. Like I think that I'm content to now mentally move Taiwan into the like I just don't think that's a thing box. Ukraine is a thing and will remain a thing, and it's irritating that every 6 months we're all expected to freak out about it. But yeah, it's a fucked up situation. It's a messed up country. It's a problem, and it's already. It's not a bigger war. It is the biggest European war of the 21st century. It's not quite competitive with Yugoslavia yet, but the balance of factors are such that if the Ukrainian Russian military got into it seriously, the body count of all of the Yugoslav wars of the 90s could be exceeded in a week. That's a pretty big deal. So yeah, that is and good. I've made it on to the third item, an hour full. But let me catch up with the comments. Richard Irma says Finland orders 64 Lockheed F-35 fighter jets for $9.4 billion. Any thoughts? Wow. Just while we were talking about this on the Discord last night, wow, I guess, is my main thoughts. Wow. The F-35 is a ticket to a club. I think other folks were. I think Loga on the Discord was describing it as a protection racket. It's sort of protection money. It is. If you buy this, the U.S. will be on your team. That is really interesting, actually, because Finlandization has come up a lot. During the Cold War, Finland was very compulsively neutral. People are saying, "Oh, we can't let Ukraine be Finlandized or what have you. We can't let Ukraine become neutral the way Finland was." And yet, Finland is now buying $10 billion worth of U.S. weapons. Yeah, man, I don't know. I make a lot of fun of the F-35. The F-35 is a waste. The F-35, the very idea of doing a fighter jet in this day and age instead of pouring a tenth of that money into unmanned fighter stuff. I think that one of the things that people will tell you is like, there's no drone that has any of the capabilities of a fighter jet. And it's like, yes, because we spent all the money on continuing to put resources and capabilities on fucking fighter jets instead of a small percentage of that money to drones that would be automatically faster and more capable and maneuverable than any fighter jet. Just automatically, if you put a tenth as much money into their development as we have put into the F-35. So yeah, I mean, the F-35 is like, it's a clown show on a wide variety of metrics, but it's also, it's a ticket to the team. Yeah, Finland has bought the F-35. I think Poland is now buying the F-35. I mean, it's good for the U.S. We're making money. Yeah, military-industrial complex makes me sad. It is very interesting, though, to think about that when everyone's like, oh, we can't let Ukraine be forced to be neutral like Finland was. And it's just another reminder that, I mean, Finland does share a border with Russia, and now it has $10 billion worth of F-35s. It's incredible. What's interesting, and so the F-35, famous for shooting itself. I think in the past couple weeks, literally an F-35 went off the end of an aircraft carrier and just did not fly. Not very aerodynamic. One of the central problems of it is it was designed to do everything, so it does nothing well. That doesn't mean that it doesn't function. There are a lot of F-16 accidents as well. Even the beloved A-10 Warthog, probably many of those have crashed inadvertently and had problems. Military technology is, by its nature, lethal and unpredictable, and kills. All the biggest mass death events in Afghanistan for U.S. soldiers were helicopters crashing. I think only occasionally because a foreign fire was involved. So yeah, I think the F-35 is the wrong thing to do, developmentally speaking, obscenely expensive, an incredible gift. Does it function? Maybe, and maybe the extraordinary negativity I have around the F-35 and the fact that it's a dead end, developmentally speaking, and an incredible gift to the worst elements in U.S. politics. Doesn't mean it's not useful for whatever. We just don't know. We haven't seen the kind of conflict where an F-35 would be tested. I think wasn't it like I think when Turkey shot down that Russian plane, was that the first actual conflict between an F-16 or I don't. The model numbers of planes are beyond me. We just don't know how war would work. So yeah, those are my thoughts on Finland ordering all those F-35s. Reingard, just checking the TikTok again. Rob had 6 video. Okay, we don't. Let's not stop talking. We can talk about TikTok again at the end. Fadel, Egyptian economy's growth rate continues to rise. With current projections, it'll grow with an average of 6 to 7%. Does that keep up with population? Also, do we rely on the Egyptian government for those figures? Fadel, maybe it's just me, but growth rates don't inspire much confidence from me anymore. I remember when everyone used to praise Ethiopia's growth rate, including Rob. Look how that turned out. I think Ethiopia's growth rate was real, but yeah, some suspicion is important. Egypt is a lot more consolidated than Ethiopia. That is very true. Fadel, as Fadel says, there are, the Coptic minority, I think, still largely sees itself as Arab. Nasser did a lot of ethnic cleansing, and it is a country that is, sort of based on the Nile and its delta with a few offshoots. So yeah, that is, I think that is true. And maybe I need to give Egypt another look. I've just so found Sisi so distasteful. Maybe his authoritarianism is working. Reingard, just read this on BBC. Foreign Secretary Liz Truss has warned Russia it will face severe economic consequences if it invades Ukraine. It does seem like Biden and allies have put together a fairly robust sanctions package. What's always interesting, there were sanctions against Russia because of Ukraine, but they were very careful to not, they could only go so far because Russia is, a tremendously important economy for money laundering everywhere, but also sort of a dynamic I've talked about with Turkey, not about the money laundering, but it's just such a and China as well, just such a huge economy that the U.S. government isn't going to screw all its own multinationals over by doing the kind of horrific country murdering sanctions that we do against Venezuela, Iran, Syria. And also, the EU, more so in 2014 than today, is very reliant on Russian gas. And it does seem like Biden and Western European countries have put together a sanctions package, a prospective sanctions package that would have severe economic consequences if Russia invaded Ukraine. Reingard says, LOL, the UK is a funny little island after Brexit. I would agree with that. The UK has not realized they don't matter. I wouldn't go quite so far as they don't matter. They do have a significant military. I don't know how the fuck they got themselves shoehorned into the AUKUS thing, but the U.S. does seem to have. It's interesting in terms of a free trade agreement. The U.S. seems to have zero interest in helping Britain with its post-Brexit fantasies. In terms of the military-industrial complex, U.S. is happy to indulge those fantasies. So, I mean, Britain was included in the Australia, UK, US agreement to proliferate nuclear submarines to Australia. Yes, 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 those nuclear powered submarines won't have nuclear weapons. But it's still a technology that only nuclear weapons powers have had heretofore. So yeah, the UK, I don't know. I mean, the UK, it's true. The UK needs to realize that it doesn't matter, but it is surprisingly powerful, surprisingly still present in U.S. military-industrial complex machinations, I think is what I want to say. No future collaborations with the Caspian Report in the works as yet, Ryan Gard. I think I need to pitch him, and I need to have a good project that works for him and works for me. And I should do that, presumably. I was honestly kind of surprised. Like, I got like 200 subscribers out of collaborating with the biggest YouTuber on the biggest geopolitics YouTuber, I think, in the world. And I got 200 subscribers, and the video that was part of that collaboration didn't do very well, or didn't do demonstrably better than other videos that I've done. So I was kind of disappointed with the amount of work that I put into that and the lack of rewards. That said, Shervin is great. I'm honored that he was willing to work with me, and I will definitely do so again in the future if he's willing. Yeah, but I don't have any current efforts to do so. Richard Irma, is there even a difference on what happens in Bosnia when at current pace they will all be living in Western Europe by the end of the century? Well, yeah, but let's bring that about. Let's make that happen before we get. I don't know. Maybe I'm just so scarred by it, having seen it growing up, having visited Sarajevo and all the, not all of, but a lot of the memorial stuff, having watched probably half dozen movies, documentaries at this point in my life about it. I just, I would be happier if we didn't see ethnic conflict in Yugoslavia again. I think it's a terrible tragedy, what happened there. Yeah. I think that's the point. That's why I want them to be in EU as soon as possible, so that the problem just gets sort of wiped away. Loco Shim says, Ryan Gart says, that's both really sad and kind of funny. What, the prospect of, oh yeah, the UK not realizing they don't matter. Brandon Commando, what do you think we will see the Russo-Turkish, do you think we'll see the Russo-Turkish superstate take over Europe? Kind of joking, but if they ever allied together, I feel like they'd be unstoppable. Only thing separating them is religion. I think that Russia and Turkey have such a long history of fighting each other that it's impossible to imagine. Unless, of course, there was some situation where, the EU was simultaneously threatening Cyprus and Ukraine at the same time. But I think that would be like it's a hard situation to imagine because Turkey remains so entwined with the United States. Yeah. And I think Russia and Turkey are much more natural opponents than anything in the EU is currently. Opponents of each other than anything in the EU is currently. So I don't see it as particularly likely. I, of course, would like to eventually see Russia and Turkey within the European Union. That's probably, a 2060s, 2070s thing. I used to think it was more of a 2040s thing, but I don't know. Time keeps wicking by. I think if the EU could ever figure out its own problems and how to move back to economic growth for like a solid decade, then yeah, I think letting in Russia and Turkey would be natural next steps. Of course, by the 2070s, you know, all of that landmass will probably have less population than fucking Texas. But anyway, that's probably incorrect. Fatal, I'm optimistic about Iraq. They've passed some good economic reforms, and there are more coming. It's up to Sadr now to make sure it continues. Well, thank you, Fadel, because Iraq is next on my topic. The Iraqi withdrawal, which is, I think I've talked about this before. It's bullshit. So U.S. Biden administration talking about, oh, they had a big ceremony saying, we are no longer involved in combat operations in Iraq. The 2,500 U.S. troops that used to be combat troops are now advise, assist, enable troops. I'm not sure. I think you guys are all probably aware of how up until 1964, or maybe even further, the U.S. troops in Vietnam were advisors, not fighters. They're not fighting there; they're just advising. So obviously, I'm pretty suspicious. Don't really like that approach to things. That's Iraqi withdrawal. Don't have a ton of respect for that. I think it is. I did read a little bit about the October elections in Iraq. So the reason that the U.S. is reclassifying these soldiers is actually to kind of help anti-Iran elements in Iraq. It was incredibly humiliating. Our assassination of the Iranian general Qasem Soleimani, along with assassination of Soleimani, along with figures in Iraqi governments and militias. The prime minister at the time, was it the same one? Basically said all U.S. soldiers have to leave. The Iraqi parliament said so. But actually, a lot of Iraqi politicians don't really want us to leave, and of course the U.S. doesn't want to leave. So these soldiers have been reclassified, and it seems like it might have actually, to an extent, because this happened this week or this month, but it was announced before the elections. Maybe it helped, but it is clear that the October elections in Iraq were quite devastating for the pro-Iran militias, which is a good thing. I think I don't like U.S. influence in Iraq, but I don't like Iranian influence in Iraq that much either. Hilariously, Muqtada al-Sadr, I'm sure I mispronounced that, Fadel, you can correct me, seems to have been the big winner. His factions, you may recall this guy from being in charge of militias that may have killed the most U.S. soldiers during the Iraq insurgency. Unlike Soleimani, who was murdered for his one level up participation in that, Sadr seems to be now more pro-U.S. than he is pro-Iranian. So he's on our side. Which I'm okay with. I think, unfortunately, the Iraqis were rather justified in that insurgency. But it's a weird thing. I haven't gotten to the point where I'm optimistic about what's happening in Iraq, but I certainly wish them luck. And I don't know enough about the country to speak further. Okay, so I've talked about Iraq. Richard Irma, in that case, Germany would probably militarize and beat them both. Yeah, I think that's what Germans do. Local Extreme Brando Commando, I doubt that Turkey and Russia would ally in that manner when Erdogan is doing his best to fight Putin in their current Cold War. I agree. Brando Commando, also, any thoughts on Poland's plan to double the size of their military? Is this something that EU, France, and Germany want, or are they opposed to this? It's an interesting question, whether the rest of the EU would be opposed to Poland's expansion of its military. I don't think so, because I think Poland crafting, it depends on what Poland would actually do with it. One interesting scenario I was thinking about is Poland beefs up its military and Belarus keeps, we talk so much about Ukraine. Well, Belarus keeps screwing with Poland, sending migrants over, what have you. What if Poland, with its beefed up military, there's some other provocation, 2 to 5 years from now, from Belarus, and Poland just invades Belarus? That would certainly. I don't think that is something that the EU would approve of or the U.S. would approve of. But yeah, I mean that's maybe a consideration. I think by and large the EU would be happy that Poland is expanding its military because that means that someone else in the EU is spending more on the military. So maybe the U.S. will get less annoyed about how little the EU spends on the military. And also, I mean, Poland is in between Russia and Western Europe, and I get the sense, I could be completely wrong about this, that Hungary is a little more Russia curious, whereas Poland, because of its history, because of the nature of the resurgent Polish nationalism, will never be Russia curious, just because the history is so dark. So yeah. So I would assume that even with the EU and Polish conflict, a more expansive Polish military is something that the EU can't really complain about. Local extreme, hopefully he's more pragmatic than his rhetoric shows. Are we talking about Iraq? Are we talking about Sadr? I don't know. Ditto on Brando Commando Poland question, which I believe I've answered. Fought a local extreme. He has also talked about the importance of inclusion, though he is also very pragmatic. Richard Irma, been to Odessa. I guess we're talking about Sadr there in Iraq. Richard Irma has been to Odessa, town of a million with important port in Ukraine, and although it's a Russian-speaking town, I could see a lot of patriotism for Ukraine there. Yeah, a very important point of Ukraine, like, Russia fucked themselves. I mean, this is one of the, on the one hand, from a rah-rah patriotic U.S. perspective, it's very heartening that Russia and China have just screwed themselves. They've got terrible hands that they've been playing very, very poorly. Of course, the flip side of that is like these guys are really nowhere near the threats that DC is constantly hyping them up to be. But yeah, I believe in 2014 that the U.S. Carried out a coup in Ukraine against a pro-Russia government. However, there will never be another pro-Russia government in Ukraine because Russia fucking invaded. The Zelensky, the current president, is someone who I think I earlier in this presentation characterized as pro-Russia, but what he was pro-peace with Russia. That is distinct from being openly pro-Russia, pro-Ukrainian alignment with Russia. That's dead. The idea that, Ukraine would voluntarily join some kind of association agreement with Russia or fall further into its economic camp, that's over. That's over. Russia killed that dead with their invasion, with their snatching of Crimea, and with the invasion support of the separatists in the east of Ukraine. I think that's a very good point and worth mentioning. Fadel says in practice. Okay. Richard Irma, could non-Russia parts of Russia, such as various Muslim regions in North Caucasus, break off? Economically weak Russia stops paying for local strongman leaders' bills, and how would that affect? I think that would be really, really horrifying. I think this is. I think I said this. Like, this is. I think Russia's very real concern because it happened in the '90s. I remember advocating for this as a college kid, not really thinking very much about things. The West was absolutely giving rhetorical support to Chechen rebellion. And I think what Russia quite justifiably sees in Ukraine is like, okay, well, sure, they get everything they want in Ukraine, Ukraine joins NATO, then they're going to start talking about Chechnya. And I'm actually a little heartened. I'm going to lose Georgian and Armenian and Azeri subscribers for saying this, but like Russia has lost I did a video on this talking about Russia's strange success in the Caucasus. But Russia has lost in the West. Lost to its West extravagantly. When I was a kid, their border was in Berlin. The border of the Soviet Empire was in Berlin. Now it's lost multiple territories that were in the Russian Empire back to the 1700s. In the East, all of the stands, Chinese has yet, Mandarin hasn't replaced Russian yet as the second language in all those places, but it's only going to grow. But in the Caucasus, Russia has now reoccupied all three of those Caucasian republics, which I think adds a sort of stability there that makes it harder for folks to make inroads into Chechnya. I'm not a big fan of separatism anywhere, honestly. I mean, I look at the big success story, South Sudan becoming independent from Sudan and it instantly falling into a civil war that killed 500,000 people. Not great. I don't like changing borders. I think that whenever we change borders, things get fucked up. Look at Eritrea and Ethiopia. I don't know. I think it would be tremendously destabilizing for the world and greatly increase the possibility of the human race being annihilated if Chechnya were to become an open issue again. So yeah, I'm not a big fan of that. Local extreme Richard Irma, not impossible. The idea of disintegration of the Russian state is very possible post-Putin. Yes, possible, not good. Richard Irma, a democratic and successful Ukraine would be dangerous for Russian regime. As an example, just like Tunisia was dangerous for strongmen in North Africa. Very true. Yeah, I just don't. I've seen little indication of a democratic or successful Ukraine. It's amazing, we have all this talk about, we're going to do these, the democracy summit or what have you, and yet very little actual support for democracies. We'll give weapons to Ukraine, and I'm sure there are funding programs for Ukraine. I don't know the details, but I'm also pretty sure they're inadequate. I know for sure that support for Tunisia, the sole Arab democracy, was inadequate and helping to lead to that democracy's failure on July 25th of this year. Honestly, considering that Ukraine voted a pro-Russia president who got couped by the U.S., I have my doubts. I think it talked about Russia and Ukraine enough at this point. Brandon Commander, Russia and China have problems 20-fold the U.S. Both have demographic time bombs. Russia's economy is about the size of New York State. Oh, God, you're probably right. 3 Chinese real estate firms just went under. The U.S. empire will outlive them. Yes, which prompts the question, why are we trying so hard to force them into conflict over Ukraine and Taiwan right now? Fadel says the growth projections are from the IMF. Okay. We're talking about Egypt, presumably. Local extreme. Honestly, this is why I didn't like your usage of the crashing of a Russian military plane as proof of Russian incompetence. I agree with the point given, but crash. Oh, wow. You're going back to video from 5-6 years ago. That's a very valid point, actually. I do make the crashing of a Russian military plane as a... Crucially, though, that was a Russian transport plane, which I think is a little distinct from, like, a combat plane. But I think that is a valid point. I think in a video 5-6 years ago talking about, is Russia winning? I think within the week or so of my making that video, there was a Russian military crash. Yeah, that's a very good point, Logan, though. And I made it a center point of talking about how badly Russia was doing. And also back then, I think that was 2016, I also fell into like the Russia's in a quagmire in Syria stuff, which, Russia won in Syria. I know that's pretty straightforwardly true. Elections are not are not yet postponed. They might actually go through with it. Are we talking about Libya, Fado? Look up the amount of B-52 crashes since the 1950s. I assume it's quite low. Quite low. Yes, Fadel says talking about Libyan elections. That's on my list. I'm gonna have to do a speed round here. Richard Irma, any sort of alignment with the West might make Russia run dry of people. That's a fair point. I think there's a lot of people who would want to lose. Local Extreme says, "What are you drinking?" Are we talking to Fadel here? I'm very confused by what's going on with messages here. The head of the Popular Mobilization Forces died as well. Oh, we're talking about. Oh, what am I drinking? I'm drinking cranberry juice. It's tasty. The head of the Popular Mobilization Forces, the Iraqi militias, died when Qasem Soleimani was killed. The A in Arabic is usually pronounced as the A in head. Wow, I am so far behind on these comments. Fadel, I'm still amazed that the U.S. actually ended up winning in assassinating Soleimani. I guess Bismarck truly was right about the United States. Yeah, it's just extraordinary. Hello, Cold Stream says, just imagine Iraq becoming the most powerful country in MENA again, and this time it's a staunch U.S. ally. That sounds like a very positive result. I'm a little horrified by what that would imply about whether Bush was successful or not. Arguable that we didn't need to kill 1 million Iraqis for Iraq to be successful and democratic, though I do hope that it has become successful and democratic. Just imagine Iraq becoming the most powerful country in men again. Depends on its fertility rates. Fadel, what are the future population predictions for Iraq? Wow. Iraq grew 2.38 percentage points last year, and the population is still very young. Current TFR is 3.6 down from 4.4 10 years ago, so they will probably at least double, if not more. I guess this is Iraqi population. All right, let's do a speed round here. Russia and Nagorno-Karabakh. Armenia and Azerbaijan are experiencing ongoing clashes. They're becoming worse. I've got a lot of coverage of the second Nagorno-Karabakh war last fall of 2020 that Armenia quite enthusiastically lost, being forced to give up Azeri territories that they had occupied for 2 or 3 decades, I believe. Crucially, the Armenian enclave within Azerbaijan, the eponymous Nagorno-Karabakh enclave, was occupied by Russia nominally for a 5-year period, but I expect that to be extended indefinitely, more or less quasi-resolving the problem, but also having Russian troops in Armenia to make sure that Azerbaijan doesn't impinge on Armenia itself, and having Russian troops in Azerbaijan to keep this Armenian enclave from getting genocided. That means that Russia went from just occupying enclaves of Georgia to occupying enclaves of Armenia and Azerbaijan. I think I put a link in the description below. My go-to for Armenia, Azerbaijan news is Neil Hauer on Twitter. He's, I think, very much a partisan of Armenia, but I think the information he provides is largely useful. What was I saying about this? And it's interesting because, it's Armenia and Azerbaijan are fighting to establish a border that had never been established. Because since the end of the Soviet Union, all 3 of those republics there were part of the Soviet Union. As the Soviet Union was falling apart, Armenia won this war against Azerbaijan that had it occupying all this territory. It has now lost all of that territory. So the Armenian and Azeri militaries, unfortunately, seem to be establishing where that border is by killing each other. Not on a grand scale, but in dribs and drabs. It seems like every week 1 person dies, or 10 people dies, or 10 people are killed, or et cetera, et cetera. And it's bad. It's horrific, and it's Russia's problem. Russia's trying to do diplomatic stuff around this, and we'll see how that goes. I just thought it was interesting to mention. What is very interesting, and I think this leads directly into what I wanted to say about Ethiopia and Tigray, is this parallel between the U.S. media, Western media more generally, is very pro-Armenia. In practice, we're not. Azerbaijan, in its military victory against Armenia, was armed by Turkey, a U.S. ally, and Israel, a U.S. ally. And I think in Tigray we see something very similar. In Ethiopia, because the Tigrayans ran Ethiopia for so long, they have personal connections with, if there are people in Ethiopia that have personal connections outside the country with U.S. Western diplomats, journalists, researchers, academics, they're vastly more likely to be Tigrayan. They are vastly overrepresented than the 6% of the Ethiopian population would indicate. So what that led to is this incredible Tigray propaganda fail that showed up in one of my videos and showed up across Western media 2-3 weeks ago. Apparently, the Ethiopian capital was about to fall to the Tigrayan forces. A militia representing 6% of Ethiopia's population was going to take the national capital, and we were being told this, even though we were also being told that that military force was 150 to 200 kilometers away from Addis Ababa. And I didn't notice that at the time either. In my video, I also talk about, oh, wow, he may be about to leave completely. Caspian Report put out a video just this week saying, Ethiopia is about to fall, and we saw this across U.S. media. And I think it's becoming very clear this week that we were all very wrong about that. Because the Ethiopian military is now pushing back, which is just for common sense purposes, isn't that surprising. The Tigrayans definitely used to run the country, had big positions in the military, managed to get a lot of military equipment. They're still only 6% of the country. Most of the country does not want them back in power. Extraordinary mismanagement led to the Ethiopian military losing a number of armies. It's still 104 million people versus 6 million people. I feel a little embarrassed about getting this wrong. But do you see that connection between... Oh, also, the Ethiopian government has been... I think I put the article in the description. I think in a month, they got 54 flights of military material from the UAE. In August, they signed a military provision deal with Turkey. So Ethiopia is being heavily armed by U.S. allies. The Ethiopian government that's fighting against Tigray. So this is the same thing, that same disconnect that we see in Armenia. Whereas U.S. media is very pro-Armenia, the U.S. government is not at all. And I think we have the same thing in Tigray, which I thought was kind of fascinating to notice. And it's interesting because with Russia, China, Iran, like more long-standing issues, we really do have a U.S. government and a U.S. military that sort of marches in lockstep. And we just don't have that in Nagorno-Karabakh and Ethiopia. So I thought it was interesting to notice. So that's Ethiopia. Yeah, I've talked about, it's just extraordinary amount of support. Great, we're at the halfway point in an hour and 44 minutes. I can go for another 45 minutes, but... okay, comments. All right, Western media is too biased towards Armenia and the TPLF. Yeah, I mean, I agree. I think that's true. Azerbaijan had real interests that just were not showing up. I think the Ethiopian... I've been annoyed by the presence of the Ethiopian diaspora and perhaps actual Ethiopians commenting on stuff that I've done on YouTube and especially on TikTok, but they're right. The whole hashtag no more movement. I think they've gone way too far in idolizing Abiy Ahmed, who I do believe does have genocidal aspects of his character, and I will be talking about that more. I'm in a produced video in the next week or so. But yeah, I think they're right to point out that U.S. media is very against, is way too pro-Tigray. I think perhaps, certainly on my part, and I think on a lot of other people's parts, you'll see some self-correction there because it's kind of humiliating to be like, yeah, oh yeah, everything's gonna fall, and then the Ethiopian government starts pushing back. In the long term, Richard Irma says, in the long term, getting rid of a legally ambiguous region might be beneficial for Armenia. I think that's true. I think that's absolutely true. I mean, it's not actually beneficial for countries to take land anymore, and the amount of resources that they were pouring into trying to set up the Republic of Artsakh was unnecessary. I think that it's quite possible that in the long run, Armenia will benefit from losing those territories they were occupying. However, in the short term, it's going to be very uncomfortable. Fadel says Rashid Abdi has been saying Abiy Ahmed's government is about to fall for months now. Yeah, Fadel, you warned me about Rashid Abdi and believing too much of what he says, and I think you were right about that. Though I also do find him to be a useful resource for the Horn more generally. It just consolidates so much stuff. But yeah, no, it's good to learn these things about these news sources. I like Neil Hauer. I follow Neil Hauer for Armenia Azerbaijan news, even though I know he's going to be super biased against Azerbaijan and pro-Armenian. Rashid Abdi, I now know, is illogically biased towards the Tigrayans. Not to say that the Ethiopian government has not been committing crimes against humanity. I believe they have. Fadel, the Turkish and Emirati drones have turned the tides. It's interesting. So I was reading unfortunately, it's the Radio War Nerd is Patreon only. But I enjoy their coverage, despite really a few really glaring errors, talking about Eritrean Tigray nationality specifically. But on military stuff, it was interesting. They had made the point that actually UAE drones were a factor at the beginning of the war, because it looked like in November, December, I think, the war started November of 2020, and this is in Ethiopia, and by December, I believe, Abiy Ahmed declared victory because the Tigrayan forces had been pushed out of every city in Tigray. And according to Radio War Nerd, the drones, UAE drones, were a factor in that quick victory. So it seems like the Tigrayans found a way to work around that, but then now find themselves defeated by drones again. I think absolutely drones playing a factor. Turkish drones, UAE drones, probably Turkish drones paid for by the UAE. Have had a tremendous impact on the conflict. But it's just the simple fact that, the Tigrayans were only going to get so far into Amhara anyway. So, yeah. Let's see here. Lago Cool Stream says, it's still amazing to me that Armenia just held territory that was internationally recognized as Azerbaijan for 20 years, and nobody cared other than Azerbaijan. I think it was 30 years, and yeah, you're absolutely right. It's kind of crazy. Brando Commando asks, how bad do you think the lira collapse is for Erdogan? Also, statements made by Bolton and the neocons suggest they have Turkey in their sights for regime change in the future, possible or not. I think the lira collapse is very bad for Erdogan. I think it's kind of I haven't wrapped my head around it, honestly. For those who are unaware, when I moved to Turkey in 2011, it was about 1.5 Turkish lira to a dollar. I think last year or the year before, it had fallen to 8 or 9 lira to a dollar, which was just shocking at the time. It is now at like 14 lira to a dollar. Wealthy people in Turkey can no longer afford to leave the country. Or upper middle class people can no longer afford to leave the country because their currency is essentially toilet paper. Yeah, it's very, very grim. and I don't think anybody expects Erdogan to survive the 2023 elections. I don't know. Yeah, there is 100%. There was an article in Responsible Statecraft I need to read up on, but I ran a video about 2-3 years ago talking about why the sort of Washington D.C. plot against Erdogan wasn't going to work, and it's just that Turkey is too well established an economy. There's just too much wealth wrapped up there, too much outside investment. Yeah, I mean, this degree of economic collapse, yeah, starts impacting that. And yeah, I'm aware John Bolton wants to, do a regime change in Turkey, but I gotta hope, and I still do believe that what I said in that video 2-3 years back still operates. That's just sort of that's a bridge too far. It's a little too insane. I think what's going on right now is that Turkey is 100% being snubbed in Washington, D.C. I mean, we've still got an alliance that's limping along, but nobody in the Biden administration wants to talk to anybody in Turkey until Erdogan's gone. And I think that's going to continue to be the case. But I don't think. I think that, while yes, absolutely, I believe Washington, D.C. is fucking stupid enough to save Erdogan by attempting to, do another coup or something. I don't think. I would hope that there is still enough rational players in Washington, D.C. to keep that from happening, just because of the amount of money that is at stake in Turkey. It is not yet a sort of Middle East tiny economy or oil-based economy that is so systemically unimportant that it can just be knocked over. Also, I think just the strength of the relationship with Germany, I think, also has something to do with that. Not that there's any love between the Turkish and German governments at this point, but just the population, the strength of those population connections. I think Germany would have serious problems with any attempted regime change operation launched from U.S. bases in Germany and throughout Europe. Yeah, Brandon Commander, honestly, if this doesn't get rid of him, he's immortal. I really need to dive in on Turkey more. I don't really understand what the fuck's going on. Why does anyone take that bloated walrus's opinions serious anymore? I have no idea. Oh, it's just because Turkey, I mean, the AK Party just controls all the media in Turkey. I really don't understand. I need to do a deep dive on Turkey. It's been too long. Fado, it looks like Wagner Group mercenaries will probably leave Libya, and without them, Haftar can't keep on to his current territory. That's exciting! Haftar is a strongman in Libya who I strongly dislike. And he famously failed to take the country back in spring of 2019, I believe it was. God damn it, I'm just not... I'm literally halfway through the list of things I wanted to discuss today. So, Libyan election may or may not be postponed. I think it's been proposed that it'll be postponed. The three, you've got Gaddafi's kid, who may or may not be disqualified from running. You've got the Prime Minister Dbeibah, who seems like a kind of corrupt oligarch, who promised when he became Prime Minister not to run in these elections, but seems to be running. And you've got Haftar, the failed strongman, nightmare, plausible CIA plant. The guy who actually destroyed Benghazi after we saved Benghazi from Gaddafi. I don't know. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times in Libya. It's possible to have a lot of hope over Libya. I think there was a lot of hope throughout the year based around elections that were maybe going to be held this month, December 25th, which now seem like they are not going to be held, which probably isn't the worst thing, actually. You want elections to be well run. But yeah, I guess that's what I have to say about Libya. Offensive versus defensive. I think I, ran a short yesterday pointing out like just a little bit of people are very angry about this distinction between offensive and defensive weapons with Saudi Arabia, and I think they're not really understanding how fucked Saudi Arabia is. Saudi Arabia is dealing not just with incursions in their airspace, but I think a very real possibility that if the Houthis finally take Marib, they could totally invade Saudi Arabia and take. I mean, they're not going to make Mecca or Medina or Riyadh, but they could take border towns in Saudi Arabia. And I do think that in order to get a peace deal, which we need to get, apparently we're not going to be able to get it until the Saudis are unwilling to concede that they've lost until they've well and truly lost by fully losing Marib. It's a goddamn shame that people are going to continue dying until we get there. But if we're going to get a real peace deal once Marib falls, we're going to need Saudi Arabia is going to need to be able to feel security. So I'm not saying necessarily that this weapons sale that went through this month was a good thing. I'm not saying that necessarily. But I am saying that we can't just knee-jerk decide that any help for Saudi Arabia is wrong, because if we want a peace between Saudi Arabia and Yemen, rather than a war that continues to go on and completely disintegrate both Yemen and Saudi Arabia, then we're going to have to do some things that are distasteful to defend Saudi Arabia, because it's incapable of defending itself without our weapons. So, I was definitely being castigated in the YouTube comments for saying that, but I think that's what I believe. Chris Murphy, the sort of crusading senator against, for 6 years against what Saudi Arabia has been doing in Yemen, voted for this particular distribution of weapons that I believe can plausibly be. It's air-to-air weapons, so they're for shooting down drones, which the Houthis have been using to attack Saudi Arabia. Air-to-air weapons, there aren't a lot of school buses that fly. I think these can plausibly be described as defensive weapons. I'm aware that may be disappointing to some folks. The Sudan coup consolidates. It's October 25th, there was a coup in Sudan. On November 21st, the prime minister that was kicked out agreed to go back to working with the military, though at the expense of a lot of his cabinet. A lot of people in Sudan see this as a betrayal. I don't know. It's a mess. We're now getting a violence in Darfur crapping up again, with Ethiopia going through the disaster that it is, neighboring Sudan having troubles. It's all rather grim. Poland versus Brussels. I am more sympathetic to Poland than I am to Hungary. It's entirely plausible to me that Poland is doing something that I haven't been able to really understand what's so bad about what Poland is doing with the judiciary. But maybe I just haven't read enough about it. Maybe it is outrageous. But it's important to remember that Poland is a post-colonial country. To its extraordinary benefit, it has jumped back into a new sort of quasi-imperial relationship with the EU that doesn't have a lot of coercion and provides a shit ton of money. I think it's somewhat natural that the Polish democracy, which has existed for 30 years, as it matures, it starts trying to make its own decisions. And, I'd have to do a much closer analysis of it to render some legal judgment as to whether the EU or Poland was more correct in their interpretation of how the Polish judiciary should be operated. But I don't know. I'm not. So what I'm saying is I'm not as knee-jerk anti the Polish government as many others are. Fully acknowledging that I'm sure there's nationalist, sexist, homophobic, shitty elements to that government, but also that is sometimes how democracy works. And it's interesting, I think, that it's sort of coming to a head. I think an extraordinary, I've heard it described as 36 billion, some places 41 billion, other places. That's what Poland's share of the EU COVID recovery stimulus would be, 36 to 41 billion dollars. My understanding is that's still on hold because Poland is refusing to submit on whatever the legal ramification, on whatever Brussels' opinion is of the Polish judiciary. Also, beyond that, I think the European Union has put through the legal framework that would be necessary to start docking Poland of other structural funds, run-of-the-mill $8 to $12 billion a year that in handouts that Poland gets. But I don't think the process to actually take those funds back has started. And I think both the Belarus and Ukraine issues are probably, I think, slowing down this particular controversy, but that's the thing. The Democracy Summit joke, I think that's what I'm going to be talking about in my produced video. So I'm not going to bother talking about that now. Oil collapses. I actually, I put that in my description now. Apparently, it's back up to $75 a barrel. But it's important to recall that this massive big peak that the oil reached over the past month at some point was $85, which is still significantly under $100 a barrel, which is something we haven't seen since 2014. In the context of whatever inflation and collapse in value that the U.S. dollar has experienced in the past 7 years. Oil prices are getting lower, and then they crashed. Libya election postpones. Merkel is leaving. Angela Merkel. I liked Angela Merkel. And she is shuffling on. What this actually means in terms of transition is hard to say. I think Germany will get more environmentally conscious for sure. The Greens are in the governing coalition, which is led by, is it the SPD, the Social Party, Democrat? I don't know, whatever. Social Democrat Party, one of the most venerable left-leaning parties in Europe. But Scholz, the new chancellor, sort of pitched himself as much of a continuation of Merkel as possible. And another member of the coalition is the liberal, which, in the European context means sort of, economically conservative. I think he's the finance minister, is the member of the FDP party. So I don't know. Hard to say. Big changes in Germany, though. And I think that's everything I had. Oh, somebody wanted me to talk about some Fox News issues, sort of inflation and crime. Inflation is real for the first time since the first time in a century. The United States is experiencing real inflation. It'll be very interesting to see if that continues. It is not, in fact, hyperinflation. But no, it's real. I think quarterly inflation was like 6%. That is huge from the context of the 21st century United States. If it continues for another quarter, then there might need to be some reevaluations around spending, Fed behavior, et cetera, et cetera. It's a very complicated situation I don't want to get into. Crime in the United States does seem to be elevated from 2019 levels. COVID, turns out, is not good for social cohesion. Any of the programs that help to keep crime from happening. That's grim. And I think that's everything. Yes, the American Empire Project. About this time last year, I ran a poll saying what my next big project was going to be. My next big project is the American Empire. And it has been certainly a research focus. What I'm going to do, I think I've talked about this a couple times. I think in my Patreon post for last week's, this week, I guess this past Tuesday's unproduced video was sort of talking about my American Empire research. I've been reading up a lot on the Cold War. I've been reading up a lot on the American Empire, which I believe started in April of 2017 when the United States bailed out the British. And I think I'm going to write a book that is now outlined, not written at all, but outlined to a very great degree. 10 chapters. My intention is, the Avoiding the British Empire book was a doorstop. I want 10 chapters of 5,000 or 6,000 words each, 60,000 word book, maybe shorter even, 50,000. So that'd be probably what, a third to a quarter the size of the British Empire book. That will go through the American Empire decade by decade. Call it the American Empire, the first 100 years, talking about the different aspects and the history of the U.S. empire across the past century. I think that'd be a very useful book, and I do have the idea of a series of videos around it. As far as timing, I don't know. I intended to write that Avoiding the British Empire book in 3 months. It took me 2 years. This book will be shorter and will be done more quickly, for sure. As to what that actually means in terms of timing, I don't believe I made any promises as to. I'm sorry if this seems weaselly to folks. I don't think I intended to make any promises as to the timeline of these American Empire projects. But would I have liked to have had this book done? I by now, yes. But was I aware at the time that might take me more than a year? Yes. So yeah, it is definitely one of, unfortunately, many projects that I want to do. But certainly now that it's been a year, it's moving further up the list of projects and priorities. So that's sort of where I am with the American Empire project. I do want to talk briefly about where I am with the channel in general. To be clear, the American Empire project and other projects that I want to do will be done, for sure. Where I am as far as continuing weekly production on the More Freedom Foundation YouTube channel is I'm getting much less positive on that. For the past month, I've been running a sort of experiment, well, for the past 2-3 weeks, of doing daily uploads. One of the things that, I've tried many things, longer videos, collaborations, many things to attempt to resuscitate audience engagement on YouTube. So I have done every Tuesday since March 2014. I have uploaded a Tuesday video. And one of the reasons I've always done that was just for my own personal discipline. At previous times in my life, I'd wanted to go off and do my own thing, and then it never really accomplished anything and had to have gone back and gotten a job. So that discipline of getting something out every week is very helpful to me, at least at the start. And also because YouTube, supposedly consistency is really important on YouTube. What's become clear to me over the past 2 years is I have an audience that's interested in hearing what I have to say on YouTube that was developed, I think, largely before 2018. And that audience, strikes me, is likely to keep coming back when I let people know that I have done something. But I just don't, I don't know that the weekly uploads are really doing anything for me in terms of building audience anymore. And I know for sure that it is keeping me from accomplishing bigger, more serious projects that I want to get done. So I'm not going to do anything precipitous. I think I tweeted about this about a month ago, but yeah, I'm definitely thinking much more seriously about stopping the weekly uploads in March of next year. So that'd be a solid 8 years of uploading every Tuesday for 8 years. And I don't know I feel like that is now currently getting in the way of my doing better produced videos. So that's what I'm thinking. I will absolutely, one of the nice things about patrons being on a video, per video patronage rather than monthly patronage is that if I just stop I don't get paid. Patrons aren't taking money, and when I produce things, I get paid. I don't know. So anyway, I just wanted to let folks know in this context, in the patrons context, that I am beginning to think in terms of, I mean, I don't want to say giving up because I want to keep producing videos. I do have a serious concern that if I said, oh, I'm going to stop doing the weekly upload so I can really focus on, finally doing that Sudan project and getting out that longer Yemen video that I want, doing this American Empire project. I have a serious concern that I, wouldn't do anything for 3 months and then just go get a job. But I mean, it's entirely possible that I could find that actually now that I have an apartment of my own and a little more discipline than I did when I was, living on people's couches, I might actually be very, very capable of producing better content, What if instead of, churning out, 5 or 6, unproduced, half-assed videos in a month, I do 2 or 3 really well-produced videos. What would that be like? So anyway, is stuff that I'm thinking about and wanted to let you guys know that that is stuff that I'm thinking about. Sort of changing the way this channel has operated for a while. It's just extraordinary the great success I'm having with TikTok right now. We've slowed down a little. I've only got 40 notifications, since in the 2 hours I've been talking to you guys. But is really indicating just how poorly YouTube is serving me at this point in terms of growing audience. So yeah, I mean, there are a lot of things I do need to do, and I'm going to keep trying things. And like I said, I'm not doing anything precipitously. I'm not going to stop right now, but I am thinking that I may stop with the attempt to do something every Tuesday. The Tuesday deadline might stop in March. And let me know what you guys think of that. Anybody have any thoughts? I'm going to read the rest of the comments now, but then I think we're pretty much done. Unless anybody has any thoughts about Tuesday production projects, anything? Nobody has anything to say. Okay. Looks like the Wagner Group mercenaries will probably leave Libya, and without them, Haftar can't keep on his current territory. That's good. Could Israel become the next target of U.S. regime change fantasies? Not this century. Richard Irma says, one of the things Turkey seems to have now adopted from Europe is European fertility rates. 1.76 last year compared to EU average of 1.53 and US 1.63. Jesus, I didn't realize the US was that far below 2.5. Ugh. I think fertility, we were talking about this on the Discord that you should all sign up for last night. Yeah, the fertility is plummeting everywhere. Which, has some really negative effects on a lot of social welfare systems and the way that we've organized the world. But it doesn't necessarily mean we can't deal with it. I'm not as fanatical about it as I used to be, but I also tend to think life extension is a real thing. And it's quite possible that we're on the cusp of some real extensions to the useful life of human beings. So maybe it just makes sense that we don't reproduce at quite as fast a clip as we used to. Brando Commando says, Armenia has a huge diaspora in the U.S. and France. Not surprised that Western media is fairly pro-Armenia. Of course, yeah, I'm not saying that there's something wrong with the media being pro-Armenia. And also, I mean, Armenians, they're people that survived a genocide. They deserve the world's sympathy. But I do think it is interesting to mark that we do have a very pro-Armenian, what's the word I'm looking for? Media. Also, they're Christians in a Muslim neighborhood, and the West still loosely identifies as the protectors of Christianity. Exactly. Richard Irma says, Merkel's call with Lukashenko left a bad taste. Interesting. Fadl says 2017. I don't know what that's in reference to. Trump and Netanyahu are officially political enemies now. Really? I missed that. entirely. Logo Cool Extreme, is this a good time to re-promote the MFF Discord? Yes, yes, everyone should sign up for the Discord. That'd be great. Logo Cool Extreme says, Gillard, that you? Feta, Gillard, yeah, okay. Maybe you could start a new channel with some other nuance, says Richard Irma. Maybe. That's definitely something worth thinking about. Yeah, my branding is very bad. I've heard that. Yeah. Fadal, you saw what I posted there. Netanyahu and Trump are officially political enemies. I don't understand what you're talking about, Galen. Fadal, I assume was the only one who watches the live streams. When you say end of Tuesday videos, no videos for week or weekly vids on days other than Tuesday. I mean, when I say stopping weekly videos, what I mean is no longer feeling the pressure to produce every week and uploading videos when they're finished. Like if I want to do as I have wanted to do, like a sort of like 20 to 40 minute video just talking about how Saudi Arabia is, Saudi Arabia is an imperial actor in Yemen. I've wanted to do that for a year and a half now, and I just keep not. I just work on that until it's done. Or if it's time to do the American Empire project, because honestly, I think I could probably write this book and do all the videos and do a bunch of videos around it in a month, if that was what I worked on for a month. That was the real problem. The reason the Avoiding the British Empire book took 2 years is because I'd be able to, get out of the mind space of a weekly video production for about 4 hours on Friday afternoon, sort of write feverishly, and then it was time to focus on the video I was going to do for the next week. So yeah, I'm at a point now where I think I could do better projects if I sort of abandon the churn. Or I don't know, maybe I would do like weekly live chats in between produced videos. Maybe I'd do that. Because that's a lot easier for me to do. Like I just spend 2 hours preparing, 2 hours delivering it, and that's all that it takes for me to do a live chat generally. So maybe I would do weekly live chats, and then do the bigger produced videos maybe only a couple times a month. That's a possibility. Yeah. When you see the end of Tuesday videos, Fadal, see what I posted on Discord. I mean, gee, look, everyone, Discord's practically part of the conversation now. Not sure how much I enjoy that aspect for people who might not be interested in Discord. See what I posted on Discord. Okay, I'm not going to read any of these comments. You just saw it, +1 to that. Will there be I would recommend going to Twitch. It's interesting. I think the OBS studio might allow me to simulcast. So maybe I'd do Twitch, but at this point, Jesus, do I not need another application? And I've seen some stuff, because I have looked into Twitch a little bit, saying that a lot of Twitch people are now switching to YouTube or something. I don't know. A lot going on here. +1 to that. When will there be a Discord live chat? Richard Irma asks. It'll be probably next week. It's been, probably next week. I think it's usually about mid-month that we do that. Perhaps you can do research and writing a script on Twitch on stream. Oh, that's interesting. That might be something to do. Yeah, like a research and write. Yeah, bring more of the process in. Would anybody really want to watch that though? Oh God. So Gelid is talking about Israeli politics, something about Trump and Gantz and Mansour Abbas, and I don't know. All right. Well, we've been doing this for almost 2.5 hours. Let me know what you think about anything we've discussed on Discord, on Twitter. You guys are my patrons. You know where everything is. Anyway, thanks so much. And have an awesome... Do I even know how to stop one of these things? Okay, let's see.